The papers in front of me had my signature on them. My signature. Except I had never signed them. It was 6 in the morning, and I was sitting alone at my kitchen table in Roanoke, Virginia, with a cold cup of coffee going gray beside me, and a document spread flat across the wood. Outside, the street was still dark. The neighbors had not left for work yet. The house was completely quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing. I had been sitting there for nearly 40 minutes. The document was a power of attorney, a full, notarized, legally formatted power of attorney that said I had willingly handed control of my finances, my property, and my medical decisions to my only son. Every bank account, every investment, the house I had lived in for 40 years, every choice I still had left in this world. The name at the bottom was mine, written in blue ink, close enough to pass a quick glance, but not close enough to fool the man who had written that name several thousand times across 4 decades of engineering reports and legal forms and birthday cards and mortgage payments. That was not my hand. And the man who had put it there was not a stranger. He was my son.
Before I tell you what I did next, I want you to understand something. The hardest part of what happened to me was not the money, though the money was real. It was not even the signature, though the forgery was real. The hardest part was the gap between the man I thought I knew and the man who had apparently been planning this for months while calling me on holidays and asking if I needed anything.
I had spent 67 years being careful. Careful with structures. Careful with numbers. Careful with anything that could quietly fail if one small thing was placed wrong. That was my profession for 34 years. I was a structural engineer for a firm here in Roanoke, Virginia. I spent my career designing bridges and checking load calculations, testing stress points, identifying the hidden weaknesses inside things that looked solid from the outside but were already failing where no one could see. Turns out I had missed the most important one. My name is Wexford Halbrook. I am 67 years old, and I still live in the Craftsman house my late wife, Beatrice, and I bought in 1984. Back then, we believed that house would be the place where our family would eventually protect us when we got old, where the people we had built a life for would show up when things got hard. I never imagined it would become the place where I discovered my own son was trying to erase me from the inside out. I retired in 2019, 3 years after Beatrice passed. Beatrice was my wife for 41 years. She was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make it feel warmer without doing anything except being there. After she died, the house got larger somehow. The hallway seemed to stretch. The kitchen sounded different in the mornings. Even the porch swing moved slower, like it remembered 2 people and had not yet adjusted to one. All I had left really was my son. Damien was 41, married to a woman named Heather, and they had a 12-year-old daughter named Laya, my only grandchild. For years, I told myself I was lucky. My son had a family, a career, a stable life. He called on holidays. He came by when something needed fixing around the yard. He let me believe I was still part of their world in some meaningful way. Until that morning at my kitchen table, I would have sworn he was a good man. That is what makes this kind of betrayal so dangerous. It almost never comes wearing a face you can recognize. It started in March with one sentence from a doctor that changed the shape of my life. Mild cognitive impairment. Not Alzheimer's, not a formal diagnosis of anything severe, but the doctor kept using words like early in monitor and progression. He spoke gently, the way doctors speak when they are trying not to frighten you while frightening you completely. He handed me pamphlets. He mentioned a support group that met at a church on Brambleton Avenue on Sunday afternoons. Then he told me carefully that I should consider making legal arrangements while I still had clear judgment because one day, maybe sooner than I wanted to admit, I might not. I drove home in silence. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for 40 minutes before I could make myself open the door. I just sat there with both hands on the wheel, staring at the front of the house. Beatrice and I had built our whole life inside. That evening, I called Damien. I told him everything. The diagnosis, the doctor's words, the pamphlets still on the passenger seat, how scared I was, how I kept trying to reassure myself, and how it was not working. Damien cried on the phone. He said, "Dad, we are going to take care of you. You are not alone in this." And because he was my son, I believed him. After that call, Damien and Heather started coming around more often. At first, I was grateful, more than grateful. The visits felt like proof that what the doctor had said was not the end of everything, that I still had family, that the house would not stay this quiet forever. They brought food in glass dishes covered with foil. Damien mowed the lawn without being asked. Heather reorganized the medicine bottles on my kitchen counter and wrote small notes on sticky pads telling me which ones to take in the morning and which ones to take at night. She had a master's degree in social work. She knew exactly how to make care look effortless and natural. They sat with me on the porch in the evenings, asking careful questions. What time did I usually wake up? Was I still driving myself to appointments? Did I ever forget to pay a bill? Did I have all my account passwords written down somewhere safe? At the time, those questions sounded like love. Heather said, "It would be smart to have a complete record of all my financial accounts in case of an emergency." She said it calmly, the way she said everything, in that even professional voice that came from years of working with vulnerable families. So I did it. I took a yellow legal pad from the drawer beside the kitchen phone and spent most of an afternoon writing down every account, every policy, every property record, every financial detail I could think of. When Heather came by the next day, I handed the whole thing to her. She smiled, touched my arm, and said, "This will make everything so much easier if something happens." I thought she meant easier for me. I did not understand yet that I had just given them a map of everything I owned. By June, Damien started talking about a trust. He brought it up the way someone brings up a topic they have rehearsed, casual enough to sound spontaneous but too polished to actually be. He said his accountant had recommended it. He said a revocable trust would protect me if my memory declined, simplify taxes, and make sure no court or stranger could ever interfere in my life. Then he said he should be the trustee. I remember looking at him across the kitchen table, the same table where he used to sit as a boy building model airplane kits, with glue on his fingers. He had a folder in front of him, thick and professional, with my name typed on the cover. 47 pages. He told me his lawyer had already drafted everything. I picked it up, felt the weight of it in my hands, and said I would need time to read through it carefully. Damien smiled too fast. "Of course, Dad. Take all the time you need." 2 weeks later, he called from his car. His voice was rushed, like he had already moved past patience and was now managing a timeline I had not agreed to. The lawyer needed the signatures by Friday, he said, or everything would have to be redrafted from the beginning. "Can you just sign it now and we will go over everything together this weekend?" I said no. That was the first time Damien went quiet in a way that felt wrong. After that call, I started paying closer attention. Not because I wanted to suspect my son. That is not a comfortable place for a father to go. Suspicion is an ugly feeling when it points towards someone whose baby pictures are still in a box in your closet. But something had shifted, and I could feel it without being able to name it yet. A few days later, my granddaughter Laya called me after school. She was 12, all nervous energy and braces, with a laugh that still reminded me of Beatrice. At first, she just talked about her upcoming dance recital, her costume, the routine she was afraid she might forget in the middle of the performance. I was happy to listen. Then her voice changed, got smaller. "Grandpa," she said, "Mom says you might not be able to come next month because you have been confused lately. Is that true? Are you okay?" I sat down on the edge of my bed and did not answer right away. There is a particular kind of pain in hearing your granddaughter ask whether you are losing your mind, especially when you know, in a clear and undeniable way, that someone has already begun preparing her to believe it. I told her I was fine. I told her I would absolutely be there for her recital. I told her not to worry about Grandpa. But after we hung up, I sat in that quiet bedroom for a long time. Damien and Heather were not just helping me prepare for an uncertain future. They were preparing everyone else for a version of me they could control. The next morning, I drove to my bank. Wells Fargo on Franklin Road. I remember everything about that drive. The gray sky, the wet shine on the pavement from rain the night before, the tight grip my hands kept on the steering wheel even after I pulled into the parking lot and turned off the engine. Inside, I asked to speak with someone privately. A young woman named Aisha took me into a small glass-walled office and asked how she could help. I told her I needed printed records for every transaction on every account I held with that bank for the past 6 months. She looked at me for a moment, reading something in my voice or my expression, then nodded quietly and left the room. When she came back, she was carrying a stack of paper nearly 2 inches thick. I went through it line by line. That was when I found them. 3 withdrawals I had never authorized. $14,000, $9,500, $22,000. All 3 sent to an account number I did not recognize. I looked up at Aisha and asked who had signed for these transfers. She checked the file. Then her expression changed. "Sir," she said carefully, "these were processed under a power of attorney we have on file for this account." I told her there had to be a mistake. I had never signed a power of attorney. I had never given Damien or Heather or anyone else the right to move money from my accounts. My voice stayed calm when I said it. But I could feel something cold opening somewhere beneath my ribs. Aisha did not argue. She turned her monitor slightly toward me and brought up the document. There it was. My full legal name, my address, my date of birth, a notarized signature at the bottom that gave my son full authority over my bank accounts, my investments, my property decisions, and my medical care. I leaned forward and looked at the signature. The letters leaned the wrong way. The capital letter at the start was too sharp. The tail on the final letter was wrong. A stranger looking quickly might not notice. But I had signed my name across 4 decades of technical reports and tax documents and closing paperwork and birthday cards. I knew the exact weight of it, the exact angle, the exact small habit my hand had settled into over thousands of repetitions. That was not my signature. The notary was someone I had never met. The date was 4 months earlier, back when I had still believed my son was one of the best things I had ever done. I sat in that small office while the sounds of the bank continued around me. Tellers and customers and printers and the low murmur of ordinary business. And I thought one clear thought. My son did not just steal money from me. He tried to legally erase me while I was still here. Aisha printed the document for me. I thanked her, folded the pages carefully, and drove home without turning on the radio. By the time I reached the house, the coffee I had left on the counter that morning was cold and untouched, exactly where I had set it before I left. I spread the papers across the kitchen table and looked at that forged signature for nearly an hour. I did not cry. I did not pick up the phone and call him. What came over me was not anger. Anger would have been easier. Anger would have made me reach for the phone and give him a chance to hear my voice break. Anger would have given him warning. What I felt instead was cold. Cold is different from anger. Cold lets you think. By the time the sun had fully cleared the trees outside my window, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I needed a lawyer whom my son had never met and could not reach before I did. I did not call my regular attorney. Roanoke is a small city in many of the ways that matter. People know people. Offices talk. And if Damien had already been willing to forge my name and submit it to a bank, I had no way to know who else he might have already contacted, charmed, or warned. So I drove 3 hours to Richmond. Before leaving, I stopped at a gas station outside Lynchburg and used a payphone. My old engineering colleague gave me one name: Eldon Whitfield Marsh, elder law specialist, Richmond, Virginia. His office was on the second floor of an old brick building with narrow stairs and brass door handles polished by years of nervous hands gripping them on the way in. Eldon himself was in his late 70s, white-haired and precise, with reading glasses on a leather cord and a stillness about him that I recognized immediately as someone who had spent decades absorbing terrible stories without flinching. He did not rush me. He read every page I brought him: the forged power of attorney, the bank printouts, the 3 unauthorized withdrawals, the notary information, my medical diagnosis, the 47-page trust document Damien had wanted me to sign before I had finished reading it. Then Eldon set the papers down, folded his hands, and looked at me over his glasses. "Mr. Holbrook," he said quietly, "what your son did is not a family misunderstanding. It is a felony. Forgery, financial exploitation of an older adult, aggravated identity theft." The room was very still. Then he asked me the hardest question I had heard in years. "What do you want to happen next?" I sat with that question for a long time. Outside the window, people were walking down the sidewalk with coffee cups and shopping bags, living their ordinary Thursday afternoon. Inside that office, my life had divided into 2 separate versions: the one where Damien was still my son, and the one where Damien was the man who had forged my name. Eldon waited. Finally, I said, "I want my money back. I want him out of my life. And I am not sure yet what I want beyond that." Eldon nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they have heard that answer before, from people who are still trying to grieve while also trying to survive. "Then we start with protection," he said. Over the next 3 weeks, we moved without making a sound. No calls to Damien, no confrontations, no scenes in my driveway. Just certified letters and legal filings and quiet revocations sent to every institution connected to my name. We revoked the fraudulent power of attorney with formal written notice to every bank, brokerage, insurance company, and medical office I dealt with. We froze any access Damien still had. Then, account by account, I moved my money into a new credit union in Richmond where my son had no history, no relationships, and no way in. During those 3 weeks, Damien still called me. He still used that soft, careful voice. He still asked how I was feeling and whether I needed anything, and I answered each time with the same quiet patience I had always shown him, while behind those conversations, every door he thought he had opened was being sealed shut. The hardest thing I had to do during that time was not the legal work. It was rewriting my will. For years, everything I owned was meant to go to Damien and Heather with a college fund set aside for Laya. Beatrice and I had talked about it at this very kitchen table. We had assumed old age would be gentle and that family would remain family. But a will is not a love letter. It is a set of instructions for the people who remain, and if I left those instructions unchanged, my son would eventually be rewarded with the estate he had tried to steal from me while I was still alive. Eldon and I rewrote everything. Leia's college fund stayed protected. $200,000, placed in an irrevocable trust in her name, accessible when she turned 25. Not controlled by Damien, not reachable by Heather, not vulnerable to anyone's poor decisions. Eldon himself became the trustee. Everything else changed. The remainder of my estate would go to the Roanoke Free Clinic, where Beatrice had volunteered for the last 12 years of her life, and to the Alzheimer's Association in her memory. Then we discovered the medical power of attorney had also been forged. That one was filed with 2 of my doctor's offices. It also had the same false signature, which meant Damien had been planning to speak for me medically, to make decisions about my treatment, my care, possibly my end-of-life wishes, without my knowledge or consent. We revoked that one too. Then there was the condo. 2 years after Beatrice died, I bought Damien and Heather a condominium outside Charlottesville. A new development with clean sidewalks and young families and good schools for Laya. It cost me $580,000, paid in cash from the savings I had accumulated over 34 years of careful work. At the time, I called it a gift. Damien had been struggling with their mortgage. Heather said the financial pressure was affecting their marriage, and Laya was getting older and needed stability. I had the money, and I thought helping them was what a father was supposed to do when he could. But I had never transferred the deed, not because I planned anything that far ahead. After Beatrice died, certain things stayed unfinished. Forms sat in drawers, appointments drifted. Some decisions simply waited for days that never arrived. So Damien and Heather moved in, decorated the place, hosted dinners there, let their neighbors assume it was theirs. But legally, the condo still belonged to me. And Damien, who had been so careful about planning everything else, had apparently never noticed that one unresolved detail. The home he slept in while trying to take mine was still sitting in my name. I called a realtor in Charlottesville named Constance. I told her I owned a condominium I needed to sell quietly. No sign in the yard, no public listing where the current occupants might see photographs of their own living room online before I was ready. Constance was professional and measured until I mentioned that the occupants did not know yet. She paused. "Mr. Holbrook," she said carefully, "they will need to know eventually. I will need access for showings." "I understand," I told her, "but not yet." So she worked through her private network instead. Cash buyers. Investors willing to purchase quickly and handle an occupied property without complications. People who could move on a timeline the occupants had not been consulted about. For 6 weeks, Damien and Heather went on living in that condo. They parked in the garage I had paid for. They cooked in the kitchen I owned. They slept under a roof that had my name on the deed, while Damien still believed he was carefully taking control of everything I had. During those weeks, he called twice. The first time to ask whether I had thought any more about the trust documents. I told him I was still reviewing them carefully. He sighed the way adults sigh at slow children. The second call came before Laya's dance recital. He said he and Heather thought the crowd and noise might be overwhelming for me. They could record it for me, he said. Laya would understand. I tightened my grip on the phone and said, "I am going." I went to that recital. Damien did not like it. Heather liked it considerably less. But I walked into that auditorium with my cane in one hand and a bouquet of purple flowers in the other, and I found a seat 3 rows from the front where Laya would be able to see me. The place was loud and full. Children were darting everywhere. Parents were holding phones above their heads. Music crackled through speakers that had seen better years. Maybe Damien had calculated that the noise in the crowd would unsettle me. Maybe he assumed the diagnosis would make me need to leave early, so he could point to it later. It did not. Because when Leia stepped onto that stage, none of it mattered. The noise and the lights and the crowded seats disappeared entirely. She searched the audience during the curtain call, and the moment she found me, her face changed in a way that nearly broke me open. She ran across the lobby afterward and threw her arms around my neck. "Grandpa, you came." "Of course I came," I said. Across the room, Heather was watching us. Not relieved, not warm, watching. Her face had gone flat in a way I had never seen before, calculating and cold, like someone running a calculation and not liking the result. She had expected me to stay home where it would be easier to manage me from a distance. I looked back at her, and for the first time, she looked away first. 3 days later, Damien sent a text that removed every last doubt I had been carrying. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was in the garage working on the carburetor of my father's old 1972 Ford pickup, a truck that had outlasted my career and my marriage, and apparently my ability to recognize betrayal when it smiled at me. My phone buzzed on the workbench. The message was from Damien. "Dad, just so you know, dinner at our place on Sunday is family only. Heather has asked that you not come this week. She has been dealing with a lot of stress, and your visits have not been helping. We will plan something for you another time. Do not take it personally." I read it once, then again, then a third time. Family only. I was his father. I had held his hand at his mother's funeral. I had paid for his education and his first car, and the roof he was sleeping under. I had sat with him through every hard thing his life had thrown at him since the moment he was born. And now, because Heather found my presence inconvenient, I was being quietly removed from Sunday dinner like a piece of furniture. Nobody wanted to move around anymore. Something in me became very clear, the way things get clear when you finally stop hoping for a different explanation. I typed one word. "Okay." I set the phone down, picked up my wrench, and went back to work. That night, I called Constance and told her to take the strongest offer on the table. No more waiting. No more quiet patience while I gave my son extra time to become the man I had always believed he was. She told me there was a cash buyer from Northern Virginia, investor, wanted to close in 2 weeks, did not care that the property was occupied. "Do it," I said. Then I called Eldon. "I am ready," I told him. "File the complaint." There was a silence on the line before Eldon answered. He said my name carefully, the way you say someone's name before opening a door that cannot be closed again. "Once we start this," he said, "we cannot reverse it. The state prosecutes its own case. You will be a witness, not the one holding the leash." I looked around the garage, at the old truck, at the tools on the bench, at the life Damien had spent months trying to quietly dismantle while calling it care. "I understand," I said. And I did. The condo closed on a Thursday morning. I drove to Charlottesville and signed the final papers at a title company with beige walls and a receptionist who kept offering me coffee I did not want. The buyer's wire had already cleared. After fees, I walked out with a cashier's check for just over $592,000. The home Damien believed was his was gone. I deposited the money into my new account in Richmond, drove back to Roanoke, made myself a grilled cheese sandwich, sat in my recliner, and watched a baseball game with the volume low. That Sunday, instead of driving to the dinner I had been told not to attend, I drove to the Methodist Church on Brambleton Avenue for the Alzheimer's support group that met a small room with folding chairs and fluorescent lights, and the kind of coffee that only tastes acceptable if you are desperate enough. I had been going for 2 months. At first, I hated it. Admitting to a room full of strangers that my mind might one day fail me felt like surrender. But over time, I came to understand that the people in that room were not there because they had given up. They were there because they were still fighting, and they needed witnesses. That particular Sunday, a woman named Marguerite Albright was there for the first time. She was 63, with short silver hair and reading glasses on a chain, and she had spent 35 years as a librarian downtown. Her husband had died 18 months earlier after years of early-onset Alzheimer's. She spoke about grief, the way people speak about it when they have already made their peace with certain things and are now slowly learning what comes after. After the meeting, we stood in the parking lot and talked for nearly an hour. She told me she quilted. I told her about my father's old Ford pickup. Then she smiled and said she would like to see it sometime. For the first time in a long while, the future did not feel entirely empty. The arrest happened on a Wednesday afternoon. I was not there to see it, but Eldon called me and described it clearly. 2 Roanoke County deputies went to the insurance company where Damien worked as a regional manager. They did not make a scene inside the building. They simply stepped in and asked him to come outside. In the parking lot, in front of the building where he had spent years presenting himself as a responsible professional and a family man, they placed my son in handcuffs. Forgery, financial exploitation of an older adult, aggravated identity theft. He was taken to the county jail, processed, and held overnight while Heather's name remained under active investigation. When I hung up with Eldon, I sat alone in my living room for a long time without moving. I thought I would feel satisfied. I did not. What I felt was grief, wearing the shape of justice, because no father spends the first years of a child's life preparing for the day that child's name appears in a police complaint. No father holds his son in a hospital room and imagines that same son someday standing in handcuffs in a parking lot because of what he did to the man who raised him. But no father should have to let his child keep stealing his life either. Damien used his one phone call on me. The caller ID showed the county number. Eldon had warned me this might happen. When the phone rang, I was already sitting in my recliner, looking at it, giving myself one full breath before I answered. "Hello, son," I said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he broke. He said it was a misunderstanding. He said he and Heather had only been trying to help me plan ahead. He said I must have been confused about what I had signed, that perhaps my medication was affecting my memory, that I did not fully understand the documents. He spoke quickly, each sentence stepping over the last, the way people speak when they are trying to fill silence before it confirms something they cannot face. Then he said Laya was crying. That was when the last soft place in me hardened completely. I waited until he stopped. Then I said, "Son, I am not confused. I went to the bank. I saw the withdrawals. I saw the signature. I have an attorney, a detective, sworn statements, and certified records going back 6 months. I am not confused at all." He cried. And I noticed that he was not crying because of what he had done to me. He was crying because of what had finally happened to him. That difference told me everything I had been trying not to know for the past several months. Damien begged me to fix it. He said he would pay every dollar back. We could settle it quietly, he said, the way families are supposed to handle things, without courts and lawyers and arrests. He used the word family. I had to let a moment pass before I could answer.
"Son," I said, "the charges are not mine to drop, and even if they were, I would not drop them. You were not trying to help me. You were trying to take what I had left. And worse than the money, worse than the signature, worse than everything else, you used your daughter to make me doubt myself. You planted that fear in her before she had any reason to carry it."
I told him I loved him. I wanted him to hear that clearly. I wanted him to understand that what I was saying next did not come from anger or bitterness, but from something much quieter and much more permanent. But love was not going to protect him from the consequences of what he had chosen to do. I am going to hang up now, I said. Then I did. About a week after Damien's arrest, Heather came to my house. No call ahead, no warning. I heard her car in the driveway just before sunset and stepped out onto the porch. She did not wave. She walked up the front path and stopped at the bottom of the steps. "You ruined our lives," she said. "I hope you are proud of yourself." I looked at her for a moment. This was the woman who had organized my pills, sat at my kitchen table, and quietly carried away the list of every account I owned. The woman who had taught my granddaughter that Grandpa might be too confused to trust, months before I had done anything to earn that doubt. "No, Heather," I said. "Damien forged my name. Damien stole from me. You both tried to shape a 12-year-old girl into a witness against her own grandfather before a single thing had gone wrong. I did not ruin your lives. I stopped you from finishing mine." Her face twisted. And then she said the one thing she should never have said. "Laya is never going to see you again. I will make sure of it." I looked at her for a long moment. Something inside me went completely still. Not broken, not frightened, still. I set down my coffee cup and said, "Then we will let a judge decide that." The next morning I called Eldon. He filed the grandparent visitation petition that same afternoon. Heather thought the one leverage she had left was access to Laya. She thought if she could not control the money or the property anymore, she could at least use the one relationship I had fought hardest to protect. She had miscalculated one more time. 3 months later, we were in a Roanoke courtroom. Damien was already waiting for sentencing. He had entered a guilty plea, trading a trial for 4 years in a state correctional facility, with the possibility of parole after serving 2. Heather had filed for divorce and relocated with Laya to North Carolina. The investigation into Heather's own role in the scheme was still ongoing at that point, though she had not yet been charged. Before we continue, subscribe to Eamon's Revenge Stories if you believe quiet people deserve justice too, because this story is about to show you what happens when you underestimate the wrong person one final time. The judge asked to speak with Laya privately. She was 12 years old, in a room she had never been in before, being asked questions most adults would struggle to answer clearly. I sat beside Eldon with my hands folded so tightly on the table that my knuckles went pale. The courtroom was nearly silent. A clock on the wall moved slowly. 45 minutes passed. When the chamber door opened, Laya came out first. She did not look at her mother. She walked across the open floor, found my chair, and sat down beside me. Then she rested her head against my shoulder the same way she had done, since she was small enough to fall asleep on my chest. I did not move. I did not say anything. I just sat there with my granddaughter's head on my shoulder while the room rearranged itself around us, and I understood, in the quietest possible way, that it was over. Heather had lost. Whatever she had told Laya about me, whatever version of a confused and failing old man she had spent months building in a 12-year-old's mind, Laya had walked through the middle of it and chosen for herself. Children are not as easily managed as some people assume. The court granted me regular visitation, supervised at first, given the circumstances, but regular and legally protected. Heather could not remove it. She could not punish me through Laya. She could not use my granddaughter as a variable in a financial strategy anymore. The judge's order made that clear. In the months that followed, I learned what quiet looks like after the noise has finally stopped. The criminal case moved through the system the way these things do, slowly and without drama. Damien reported to a state facility in Central Virginia in the early fall. I did not attend the sentencing. Eldon was there. I was in Roanoke, sitting in my garage with the side door open and a cup of coffee going cold on the workbench, working on my father's old truck the same way I had been doing on the afternoon. Damien sent me that text. The condo was gone. The fraudulent power of attorney was gone. The forged medical directive was gone. Every account my son had tried to access had been closed, transferred, or legally protected. My will reflected the truth of my life rather than a version of it I had held on to longer than I should have. Laya started visiting on alternating weekends. The first time she came back to the house, she stood in the kitchen doorway and looked around like she was memorizing it again, after being away too long. Then, she asked if we could make the grilled cheese sandwiches I used to make when she was little, with the sharp cheddar and the thin sliced tomato, the ones her grandmother had taught me to make. I said yes. We stood at the stove together, and she talked about school, about a book she was reading, about the dance class she had started at her new school in North Carolina. She did not talk about her parents, and I did not push. Some conversations belonged to a later year. Marguerite came by that same month. She drove over on a Saturday morning with a thermos of coffee and a curiosity about the old Ford truck that I had described 3 times since we met. We spent most of the morning in the garage, and she turned out to know more about small engine work than I expected for a librarian. She had learned it from her father, the same way I had learned it from mine. Before she left, she said she had a quilt she had been working on for 2 years and could not decide what the last border should be. She asked if I might want to come look at it sometime and give her an opinion. I said I would like that very much. I am not going to tell you the next part of that story is simple. Nothing after a year like that is simple. There are days when I still reach for the phone to call Damien and then remember all at once why I cannot. There are evenings when the house feels large in a way that has nothing to do with furniture. There are moments when I look at Laya and feel 2 things at the exact same time. Grateful and grieving, both equally real. But here is what I know now that I did not fully understand before all of this happened. The diagnosis did not make me weak. The forgery did not break me. The moment I sat at that kitchen table with cold coffee and a document I had never signed, I did not fall apart. I got cold. I got clear. I started making a list. I was a structural engineer for 34 years. I spent my career finding the hidden places where things were already failing before anyone noticed. I measured load limits. I checked what the structure could hold and what it could not. I identified the weak points that looked solid from the outside. When my son looked at my diagnosis and decided I was one of those weak points, he was not wrong that I was more vulnerable than I used to be. He was wrong about what vulnerability means. It does not mean finished. It means you choose your next move more carefully than you would have before. And I chose mine very carefully indeed. If this story stayed with you, I would like to hear from you in the comments. Would you have stayed silent and gathered proof the way I did? Or would you have confronted them the moment you found those withdrawals? There is no wrong answer. But I would genuinely like to know. If you believe quiet people deserve justice too, subscribe to Eamon's Revenge Stories for more stories about betrayal, survival, and the kind of patience that eventually closes every trap. And if you have ever watched someone underestimate a person they should have respected, leave a comment below. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is nothing at all. Until the moment they do everything.